Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Jane Debevoise, and I'm the chair of Asia Art Archive in New York and in Hong Kong. And I'm speaking here tonight from Asia Art Archive in Brooklyn, New York. It's 9 p.m. or 9:02 to be exact, our time in New York. Our panelists will be speaking from their respective homes in California and Oregon. It's 6 p.m. there, and we are collaborating with my colleagues from Asia Art Archive in Hong Kong, where it is 9 a.m. in the morning. So thank you all to the panelists for joining us today, and thank you to the AAA team for your important behind-the-scenes support. There are people behind the scenes here, as everybody I think now knows with Zoom, and we are really grateful for them being there and working with us to hopefully make this as seamless as possible. I also want to thank all of you attendees for tonight's event who are coming to us from all over the world, as well as our sponsors, the SH-HO and CK and KHO foundations, who are, for whom we are extremely grateful for their critical contributions to our educational programming globally. Tonight's event is the 4th edition in a series of programs we call Life Lessons. Life Lessons have been organized to celebrate Asia Art Archive's 20th anniversary. Yes, we are 20 years old this year. And to recognize the importance of pedagogy in the arts. And to celebrate as well all the art teachers, and especially teachers who are also artists, who have transformed our lives and without whom we would probably not be listening to or participating in this program tonight. For today's life lesson, that is subtitled Innovation Through Tradition, we have invited two artists who also teach. And we have invited them to talk about their own education, their own training, and how this training informs both their individual art practice, as well as their current teaching methods and philosophy. The first artist that I will introduce today is Wong Gong Yi. Wong Gong Yi's formal training in art began at a very early age. And in the 1960s, she attended the specialized high school affiliated with the Central Academy of Fine Arts in Beijing. Her schooling, however, was soon interrupted by the many political campaigns that sent students to the countryside and shuttered classrooms all over China for over 10 years. But soon after the Cultural Revolution ended and schools reopened, Gong Yi was admitted to the printmaking department at the Zhejiang Academy of Fine Arts, now called the China National Academy of Art in Hangzhou. There she graduated with a master's degree in 1980. After graduation, Gong Yi continued to teach at the academy in Hangzhou, during which period she had the opportunity to travel twice to France on government-sponsored exchanges. In 2001, she moved to the United States, where she has been teaching independently in her studio in Portland, Oregon. All this time, however, including the last 2 decades in the United States, she has continued to experiment, create, and exhibit her work. Tsherin Sherpa also began his art studies very early. When he was 12 years old, he began to learn traditional Tibetan thangka painting from his father, renowned thangka artist, Master Urgen Dorje Sherpa. In 1998, he moved from Nepal to California, where he worked as a thangka artist and instructor at Tibetan Buddhist centers throughout the state. Now, after 2 decades of living and creating in the United States, he has moved back part-time to Kathmandu, where he founded the Himalayan Art Initiative, a space for students to learn traditional thangka art. Throughout his career, Tsherin has used traditional techniques and motifs he learned from his father to explore hybridization of cultures he experienced as part of the Himalayan diaspora. Now for a little housekeeping. Today's talk will be divided into two parts. First, for the next 45 minutes or so, and maybe a little bit longer, we will take turns asking, or I will take turns asking the artists questions. Please note that Gong Yi will be responding to these questions in Mandarin Chinese. And my colleague, Furen Dai, who you will see or can see on the screen, will translate her answers into English. Tsherin will be speaking in English, although I understand he speaks a little Chinese. Then we will reserve the last 10 to 15 minutes for questions from the audience. Attendees, please note that at any time you can type your questions into the Q&A box, and I will read as many as I can given the time constraints. So now let's start. The first set of questions that I have, and what I will do is I will ask Tsherin and Wong Gong Yi more or less the same question with slight differences, and they will answer them. So the first question that the first set of questions that I am going to ask relate to their early education. I would like to know details about their early education and also how their early education may have informed or influenced their later work. But first, may I have this first slide, please? I'm going to ask Tsherin the first question. Could you please speak a little bit about your early education or your apprenticeship with your father? And perhaps you could refer to the slides on the screen. What was it like to study with your father? And how did he teach you?
Thank you, Jane. This is wonderful to be here today. Regarding the traditional studies, I think my father was teaching in the same manner that he learned from some of his teachers, including his uncles. So when I was around 12 years old, I used to draw a lot of comic characters and like drawings and stuff from different charts and stuff that I would see in books or anything like that. And he thought like he could probably pass down this knowledge to one of his children. So because I was attracted to drawing, so when I was still like going to my high school, I first learned like how to sketch the traditional iconography. And there's a grid system in Tibetan painting where we use certain exacting measurement system to create the images. And the first thing I was taught was the head of the Buddha for like, I had to redraw over and over for almost like 3 months. And then eventually like I would get to learn the whole body and then the clothing. And so that was kind of like the training. And simultaneously, I was also going to a monastery nearby to study Buddhist philosophy, to understand the symbolism and stuff like that. So it was very gradual. It was for about like almost 5 years of training, the basic training.
And how did your father, I mean, was he in the room with you? Did he give you pointers? For I understand you were his only student?
Yes, at that time, even though my father had taught 2 of his younger brothers earlier, At that time, I was very young. So by the time I was learning, my uncles were already like making their own works. And I would be in the room with my dad in his studio, and he would show me step-by-step instructions on how to draw the grid, how to measure them. And then I would kind of follow that same path and try to draw that over and over for like almost 6 to 7 hours a day, just to get the hang of it, to the point where you begin to see the subtleties of lines and stuff like that. So it took me about 3 months to actually complete the Buddha head in the beginning.
And these images that you were, and I understand it's you on one side of the screen and your father and yourself, as well as a young relative on the other screen. When you painted these paintings, were they for a specific place? Were they commissioned for a specific event, or were they just practice paintings for you?
These were commission works. This was much later. Like I think was after a year or two. This photograph was taken by somebody who visited my father's studio, and I was actually. So the process would be, first I would learn how to draw the images, and simultaneously I would be taught how to grind the mineral pigments, how to use the binder in the mineral pigment. Like, for example, we used hide glue and water, and the consistency of the paint, and then finally just flat paint application, almost like paint by numbers kind of thing. Like you would be instructed to paint this over here, that over there. And then eventually learning how to do the gradation step by step. And so this was like a commission piece for a monastery that my father was working on, and he would instruct me to do the basic paint applications.
Great. Can we have the next slide? Now this slide, these two images, these black and white photographs, were supplied by Gong Yi to us when we asked her about her early, whether she had any photographs of her early life or her early childhood. As I mentioned in her short introduction, she went to the high school affiliated with the Central Academy of Fine Arts in Beijing. This is a very difficult school to get into, actually, in the first place. And she was therefore already noticed as an accomplished artist in order to get in. But I would like Gong Yi to talk about how she was taught, how were you taught to draw? What was it like at this high school, and what was the instruction like? And then maybe you could talk about these photographs.
哦，我现在说吗？
可以了。
对。哦，就是这个中央美院附中这个学历呢，是从1962年到1969年，然后呢，从1969年呢又到1974年，分2块。那么这个就是我原来出生的地方呢，是天津。但是62年到74年呢，就是在北京。北京呢，在当时62年到69年的时候，那大家都知道是一个非常这个政治动荡动乱的这么一段时间。那时候像我这样一个傻丫头，就是16岁，跑到北京，那就是全部就是乱套了，人就是所以你说，你在问我在那儿学了多少艺术，我很难就是说，说得很详细哈。就是我找到。
Gong Yi, stop for a second。我那个夫人应该给你翻译了。好，等一下了。
Okay, so my high school life actually divided into two parts. The first part would be from 1962 to 1969. And then the second part will be from 1969 to 1974. And I was born in Tianjin, which is a city very close to Beijing. And then I moved to Beijing for the school from 1962 to 1969. And you have to know, like, during that moment, it's very chaotic, politically very chaotic in Beijing. And I was really young. I was only 16 years old. So when I moved to Beijing, and Jane, when you just asked me that, what did I learn from the school? But I was very young and I don't really know, like it's hard for me to say I learned a lot of art at that moment.
Yeah, 我现在找到一篇那个，我当时在1962年写的2篇日记哈，一篇日记就是写的是那个天坛，就是哇，我当时16岁去到天坛，我很感动，那个古建筑的美，它制造了一种那个就是人到天空的那种感觉，我现在不在这里细说了啊。我现在后来看到日记，我很惊讶，我16岁我怎么会能看懂这个东西？但是接下来的一篇日记呢，就是我的老师在给我讲什么呢？附中的老师讲，这个工农兵的素描啊，这个无产阶级和资产阶级不同的审美，这对我来说，其实我有点就是根本闹不清楚，就是然后希腊的石膏呢，不能和这个工农兵的形象来媲美。这对我来说也是，就是说，我脑袋里就是闹不清楚了，有什么区别？然后最有意思的是呢，1964年呢，我就是因为我的这种不懂吧，就变成了一个坏学生。这要说起来得讲好几个小时，这个经历，就是我。
那个坏学生的那个故事，等一等，我们让那个
不要讲故事太长了。
好的。Brandy.
Okay, so I actually found 2 diaries that I wrote back during that period of time. And the first diary is something that I wrote about the feelings when I went to visit the Palace of Heaven in Beijing. And I was really shocked by overwhelmed by the old architecture there. It really transformed that feeling of people entering heaven. And I got that kind of sense. And then the second diary is actually, I'm writing down what the teacher back in the high school trying to tell me. And he told me to really differentiate the differences between proletariat to capitalist. And also, and it says, 工农兵, like all the farmers and like
soldiers and peasants.
Soldiers and farmers, yes. You should differentiate these group of people from the Greek statue. And this kind of sentence really confused me. And so I was 16 and I was in this kind of situation, and it just like constantly encountering all these different conversation.
呀，那64年呢，我就因为是很有意思的原因，我就成了一个坏学生。那整个64年就学校里边就是同学就没有人理我，我就是一个非常坏的学生。然后呢，助学金又没有了。但是这个，因为我这时候我就觉得有意思的就是说，为什么这个东西好像我很麻木呢？因为我觉得我就是从小就是爸爸妈妈、这个爷爷奶奶，包括小学、幼儿园老师、小学老师特别的宠爱我，所以我这人有一种傻乎乎的那种自信，我不知道害怕，所以呢，就这1年没有人理我，我就活得还挺好的，然后就是会早上起来跑步啊，不吃好吃的东西来惩罚自己，因为自己是坏孩子。然后64年呢，我们整个学校呢就到那个乡下参加那个，当时我跟你们说都听不懂，当时那个4清运动，你说你们怎么懂这些事儿？就是工作队，我们这些个高中生，其实年64年我多少18岁，我们去做这个到农村哈，给农民那个就干嘛呢？当时带着我们的是清华和北大的大学生， 所以这一段就
关于等一等，好的。
So actually in 1964 and that year, because of some incidents, I was considered a bad student for the high school, and at that time, no students wanted to hang out with me, and also I lost my scholarship. So, but since I was a kid, actually all my parents, my grandparents, and my kindergarten school, my primary school teachers, they all loved me, and that kind actually gave me some kind of confidence. And so I don't really feel there's like unusual when people don't talk to me. And at that time, I'm just jogging and then don't eat good food to punish myself. And then in 1964, that's the year when I was 18, and we went to the countryside, and we were leading by a group of college students from both Tsinghua University and Beijing University.
Yeah， 然后就说这个时候我就说，其实很好，因为北京是个政治文化中心，又是这个处在这个时代，所以呢，我觉得就是我们切切实实的参与了这些，而且感受到这些，啊，那到最后就是下面就是过了一下，就是66年，那就我跳到这里，因为时间不够嘛，就是开始文化大革命。那时候我在北京。所有的打砸抢，我是亲眼目睹。因为美院附中呢是在这个市中心，就在那个中国美术馆旁边。可是我觉得特别幸运的，我要跟大家说的就是，我真很幸运。那个时候我有一个好朋友，他的父亲是那个在三联书店，他们家就有一箱子就锁着的书，我就跟他去，我说你借给我看吧，我们就偷偷打开，他爸不在的时候。当时我在那个外面都在打砸抢的时候，我就看的是雨果的《悲惨世界》，还有那个托尔斯泰的那个《复活》。那这两部书哈，到现在都深深的印在我的脑子里，因为它和外面就形成一个太强烈的对比了。我觉得这是我学到的东西呀。
Okay.
So, yeah.
Serene.
Back then, because I think I consider Beijing as the center for the politics and culture at that moment. And I feel I'm actually lucky to be at that place to witness everything. And in 1966, when everything started happening for the Cultural Revolution, and I was in Beijing at the moment. So I see all the robbing and scandalizing right next to the Kafa campus. And at that moment, I have a good friend whose father is an editor at the Sanlian Publishing House, which is a pretty famous publishing house in Beijing. And he has a whole case of books at home. So we just secretly open his case and reading these books while all the things that are happening in the outside world. And then two books that really affected me. One is called Le Miserable by how to say Hugo? Victor Hugo. And then the second one is by Dostoevsky. 复活 is Reverence. This is the Russian writer.
Yeah.
Anyway, we'll get the names of those two books, but it was Victor Hugo and Dostoevsky.
Yeah, it's okay, it's okay.
所以
呀，然后好了吗？过了一年呢，那这个是大家就是开始那个分成派，然后就打仗啊，互相辩论啊，争论什么。那我和几个朋友呢，我们就非常幸运，就是我们就跑到那个北京郊区潭柘寺啊，什么什么哪儿去，骑着自行车去野餐去玩，完全脱离了这个。所以就是我觉得，而且那个时候呢。因为那个大家开始了新的这个文化大革命，那我呢就变成好人了，因为没有人把我当坏人了，就大家又接待了我。当初就是来整我的老师呢变成坏人了，所以就很好笑，你知道吗？这里头，所以那段就是反而我很开心，就玩得很那个，很幸福。那69年呢，就是它是1969年是，不是文化部，好像是中央吧，就是让我们整个学校哈， 去到那个部队，就是在张家口那边的，这是个什么
等一下。
OK，
Okay, but we're going to have to also go back to Tsherin for the next group of questions as well.
Okay. So actually the year later, Beijing became this debate center when a lot of things happening, and it's divided into two parts. And I actually at that time really enjoyed my life. I just went out with my friends, and then we go biking outside of the Beijing, and then we went to visit different temples outside of Beijing. And because at that moment the revolution started, and I all of a sudden became a good student again. Like those teachers who accused me to be a bad student, those teachers are now become bad person. So the whole situation reversed.
Okay, why don't we stop here for a second, go back to Tsherin a little bit for his, and then we will come back again to Gong Yi. Okay, Tsherin, next slide, please. Okay, Tsherin, your education obviously was slightly different. You didn't go through the Cultural Revolution. You didn't have the political campaigns that unfortunately Gong Yi had to endure during her childhood or during her teenage. But you decided for some reason to go off to Taiwan to learn computer science. Why did you do that?
Yes, I think after the 5 years of intense like training, traditional training, which was even more pressure because I was studying from my father, and so that kind of like was I think too much to handle at some point. So I just needed to explore beyond like what is there, in front of me. So I got the opportunity to go to Taiwan on a scholarship to study basic computer science and also Mandarin. So I actually went there for 6 months at first. And it was kind of like my first exposure to anywhere outside of Nepal. So, Taiwan being a very high-tech country at that time. So was kind of I would say more of like a university education for me. So I got to learn Mandarin a little bit, and also that was probably the first time I got to visit the proper like art museum outside of Nepal. There was this Grand Palace Museum or something like that. And then, so I think it was kind of a different environment, and also it sort of like taught me a lot, I guess, probably by observing like different cultures and things.
We'll go back to perhaps your and then you went back to Nepal, and then you spent quite a number of years continuing your Buddhist studies, if I'm correct.
So I was there for about like in total back and forth. I would be there for 6 months and come back for a couple of weeks and then go back again. So in total about 5 years. And around 1992, I went back to Nepal and again started working with my father on various projects like painting monastery murals and even working on some commissions, and simultaneously again studying, picking up all the Buddhist philosophy wherever I had like stopped, and was a new experience because I think earlier I was a bit too young to understand this whole traditional like art information. Was too much to handle for me. But eventually it was becoming more and more exciting, I guess. I was seriously paying attention to like the art form, and also the exposure outside sort of like gave me a little bit of how do you say, made me probably a little mature to pursue it more seriously. Yeah.
And right. We'll go back to your artwork in a moment. That's extremely interesting. I've heard so many times people who travel outside of their country actually start to appreciate their own culture and some of the things you've learned in the past more when you see it slightly from afar. Let's go back to Gongyi for a second. I'm going to show, can we have the next slide? We have the next slide, this one.
Oh.
Yeah, Gongyi, you obviously, I mean, you endured a lot of unusual, let's say unconventional education during your high school and time. And in fact, your formal education was more or less halted, but you were admitted to the printmaking department at the Zhejiang Academy of Fine Arts once it opened after the Cultural Revolution. All universities were more or less closed during that period, but they were reopened in 1977, 1978, and you were among the first students to return to university. And in 1980, you graduated with a master's degree and you created a series of work about Chojin, about this image. How did your past experience in the countryside or during the political campaigns or during your earlier education influence this series, for which you received a first prize at the National Youth Art Exhibition? Tell us about this work.
Oh, 这个是我觉得那个是当时老师呀，这样说就是当时老师1980年我们1978年到的这个浙江美术学院版画系。那个时候我根本就不懂艺术，我坦率的说哈，我也没做过创作。我那之前是在美术出版社哈，就是文化大革命结束之后去美术出版社做了几年编辑。那编辑呢，我也是个烂编辑，因为我根本就不会，经常跟领导吵架。然后那个领导呢，还特别对我好，所以我真是命好。他说现在要重新开始招研究生了，你去考吧。我说我考不上，他说我给你走后门。结果呢，反正中间很多周折哈，我就考上了。考上之后呢，老师就是第一年是带我们做这个考察呀，去敦煌啊什么，去西安呢，很快乐。那第二年就是老师就说，现在我们做毕业创作，问我你做什么，我就脱口而出，我不是一个深思熟虑，我说我做秋瑾。那秋瑾就是我在等于60几年在北京第一次见到他的照片，就在那个历史博物馆，我就真的被他就是震撼到了。当时我记得我站在那儿，我无法移动我的脚步，我说怎么有一个女人是这样的啊，这么样的美，而且拿着一把剑哈。因为小时候学过他的鲁迅的课文嘛，就是那个药讲的是他的故事。那我说出这个决定之后呢，我更不知道怎么做，我也不会做。最后就是经过很多这个深入生活啊，到绍兴啊，怎么样啊，采访他的亲戚，就开始做了。那一做呢，我根本不会做，所以做的是一个说明式的一个方案，就是把他的故事一张一张像画连环画一样，因为我只接触过出版社的连环画，那大家就是说不行，这样不行。那这中间就是我学到一些个看一些书吧，中国戏剧理论啊等等，哦，我知道艺术创作不是这样，那就重新做。而且那个时候因为这个 文化大革命结束以后，中国是一个特别好的一个开端，就开始呢，就是说在北京有一个国际图书展览，就是世界各国好的书来这边展。
Gongyi, just you can start for a second.
OK.
Because you.
So yeah, in 1978, I went to Zhejiang Academy of Fine Art. And to be honest, I don't think I'm really a good artist because right before I went to the school for grad school, I was working as an editor at a publishing house. And to be honest, I'm not a good editor at that time too. And I always fight with my boss. But my boss is actually being super nice to me. So he really encouraged me to go and apply for this grad school. And I told him that there's no way I will get accepted, but he still said, just do it and I will help you. So I was really lucky and I got accepted into the Zhejiang Academy of Fine Arts. And for the first year, I really had a great time. And our teacher took us to Dunhuang, to Xi'an, just to visit different places. And for the second year, everybody needs to start preparing for their thesis show. So when the teacher asked me, what do you want to do? And I just like immediately respond with, I want to make a series about Qiujing, which is the figure you see in this picture. And she said, I saw her first image while I was in Beijing, and I was shocked when I see her image at the History Museum in Beijing. And I was just stunned by how beautiful she is, and also the strength in her body by holding this sword. And also I heard about her story when I was studying Lu Xun's short story called Medicine while I was in middle school. And then in order to prepare for my thesis show, I went to visit a village called Shaoxing, where this woman Qiujing came from. And then so my first proposal for this whole series, for this body of work, is more towards descriptive or more narrative. And I did in a way like the sequential cartoon, like the poem, the cartoonish book back at that time in China. And then we didn't like it, so I spent more time studying the theory of fine arts, the fine art theory in China. And also it's very lucky because it's right after the Cultural Revolution, and there's an international book fair that is happening in Beijing at that time.
Yeah, 那这个时间那我天天都在图书馆看很多那个新的画册，就是世界各地的画册，那就整个脑子就是等于就灵活了吧？那就一点一点，这就不能细说，一点一点就是过渡到最后的这个构图。那最后刻的时候只刻了1个月，当时刻的时候呢，正好就是中国在报道那个张志新的一个事迹，那个人呢有点像邱姐，当时他就是每天报纸在报道，那我每天是到了工作室先看这报道哭一场，就是特别愤怒，就等于我把我前边这么多年的那种愤怒和悲伤吧，我觉得在我刻这个木刻秋瑾的时候都放在这个刀底下了，所以这个作品会感动别人，我觉得就因为我真的是掏心掏肺的，不是我艺术上有什么，因为我根本都没刻过木刻，第一次刻木刻，没有人相信这件事。Yeah.
So at that moment, I slowly transitioned from this kind of sequential style to the what you saw here, the wood carving prints. And at that time, I spent all my time in the library and just reading all the books they have in the library. And also at that during that time, there's this the woman figure, which is very similar to Qiujing, whose name is Zhang Zhixing. And so the newspaper is report her story every day. So every day when I went to my studio, I just start reading. I started my day by reading this newspaper. and then I will get all angry and sad. Then I start create these works. So basically, if you say I'm not like a master in this technique, because this is really my first time to do wood carving. And when I say this, a lot of people don't believe that. But I just feel like I'm pouring my heart and so into creating this work, and both merged with my emotion.
Right. The story about Zhang Zhixin is a story that was being publicized about a woman who was treated extremely terribly during this period of time. And in fact, she was jailed, I think, raped and murdered or died. And Chojin herself was a martyr, a revolutionary, also fighting against the Qing court at that point in time, and was executed. And I think what Gong Yi was saying is that all the anger and sadness and pain that she felt during the previous 10, 15 years came out in this work. She identified with these two women and poured her heart out in it. We're going to go back to Tsherin Sherpa. He dropped off and now he's dropped back in. I think we're having some connectivity issues. Can I have the next slide, please? Tsherin, I see you. You're fine.
Yeah. Hello.
Hi. You've got a bit of an echo. Is that the case?
Oh, okay. Yes,
Anyway,
can you hear?
Yep, I can hear you. You're fine.
Oh, okay.
We're looking at the next slide. I mean, one of the things, we're going to move along a little bit more quickly here. Both of you, Tsherin and Gong Yi, have traveled a lot. You've gone from Nepal to Taiwan to Nepal, then to the US. Gong Yi has traveled from China to France to the US. And then both of you travel back and forth between the US and your home countries. And you've been introduced, as you say, to different cultures and experience, and your work has changed. Tsherin, what could you speak about? I mean, this image here, the butterfly effect chaos theory is, you know, speaks to or can be compared in a way or contrasted in a way from the earlier works we were looking at. This is more contemporary. And can you talk a little bit about how you started thinking about innovating within the tradition of thangka painting? How did you learn how to do that?
So after I came to America and I had the opportunity to interact with, can you hear me now?
Yep, perfect.
Okay, so I had the opportunity to interact with more artists, and again, having been to America in here in Bay Area, and I started teaching some traditional thangka painting classes also. And many of the students who were interested in learning were artists, art instructors, even Buddhist practitioners. And so, and also the fact that there are many, several museums to visit to, and interacting with different artists from different traditions, you know, like especially art students. And so it was a gradual progression. Over the years, I began to visit galleries and see other types of works, and some of the students who were studying with me they wanted to learn the thangka technique, so they were art professors, and they would like exchange give me tips on what to read, so, or basically to I guess to understand the Western art history also. And so all of these interactions sort of like helped me move a little bit beyond the traditional like artworks, and gave me the opportunity to look beyond it, basically, which was not possible in the environment I was in Nepal, because my family is very strict traditional artists, and many of the visitors that we had were also like monks, and they would be talking about the Buddhist philosophy. And so I didn't have that exposure, I guess, would sort of like give me the opportunity to look beyond the traditional setup, I guess. And probably around like 2003-4, I started experimenting few things outside the traditional, outside the tradition. And that sort of like gave me the opportunity to work with different materials, different compositions. And so over years, so this work that we have on the screen is from, I think, 2009. And I was a bit reluctant to actually show my works also in the beginning, because I didn't go to a traditional like art school kind of a setup. So I was, it took me a lot of courage to actually bring out these works in, like share it with friends, and so it was a gradual progression, I guess. Yeah.
Let me go to Gong Yi again. Can we have the next slide? Thank you. Gong Yi, you also traveled, as I said, and these paintings were done in France. Can you talk a little bit about your experience in France and how you made this big change between what you had done before and these installation works?
Yeah, 这个对我来说这都非常简单的事情，因为我是一个很容易被环境影响的人，所以1986年就是第一次出国。那个现在的人没法想象我们那个时候出国受到的这个刺激，比方说我啊，因为现在大家在网上你都可以看到，国外怎么样，没有什么新鲜，只是你去没去。那个时候在中国，我们不知道国外是什么情形，所以86年我很荣幸去了之后，那我记得我从卢浮宫出来，我就站在马路上，我就嚎啕大哭，别人都不明白，说你哭什么？你是不是想儿子了？我说不是，我太受刺激了，因为没有见过这些东西，那就是世界是还有一个地方是这样的，然后到了那个蓬皮杜中心，就看到那个什么东西都可以是艺术，它那个鹅卵石堆一大地，就是哇，就是艺术啊，放上霓虹灯。那对我来说，我就是一下子，我原来脑子里边那些个栅栏就夸夸夸夸全倒了。所以他们这就简单接说，文化部当时让我们到那个 X 去做一个展览，那我当时本来应该做。抱歉，
没关系。
So when you ask me this question, it's actually very simple for me because I'm very easily affected by the environment. And in 1986, it was my first time when I traveled abroad. And it's harder really for like nowadays people to imagine what kind of shock you will get when you go into the foreign countries. Because right now you all have like the internet and you know exactly what's happening outside of your home country. But at that moment in 1986, when I traveled to France, and when I come out from the Louvre museum, I start crying hysterically on the street. I'm just really overwhelmed and shocking by what I saw from the museum. And I don't understand like there would be an entirely different world outside there. And when I went to Pompidou also as well, the boundary for art is eliminated in my heart. And I saw that everything can be art, like all these stones on the ground or neon light, you can call all of these things art.
Okay. Yeah. Now talk about X.
还说吗？
可以。
哦，所以在让我们做作品的时候，那时候我就正好，我觉得做木刻太不过瘾了，就做木刻，因为看到别人那样疯着玩哈，那我就用宣纸和墨。当时其实没有带墨，就带了一刀宣纸，然后跑到马赛买的墨， 噼里啪啦就在地上这样喷啊，这撒，然后弄啊，反正就是不用细说了，就是等于我自己就是耍开了，你知道，而且很高兴啊，很高兴，很高兴，就是这样，因为看到了可以这样做，那就做了，没有什么理论呐、或者谁指导啊，没有这回事，就是你看到了你就知道，哦，可以这样玩，很简单。
Okay, Bryn.
Okay, so at that time, I just the transition. Why I made the transition is I feel like wood carving is not it's not exciting enough for me anymore. After you see all this art, since everything can be art, and at that moment, because I brought a bag of rice paper with me, and I went to buy. The ink and brush, and then I just started pouring everything and put everything on the ground, and I just let it go crazy. I really enjoy the whole process, and I feel happy. I feel like I let my body free, and because like it's just like I think my understanding of everything can be art.
Okay, so we're going to move quickly and we're going to sort of return to talking about you as teachers. So we have been talking about you being taught, you experimenting, working on new art forms through your travel experience, through your combination of experiences between your traditional background or your very academic background, and then seeing what else is out there. But both of you have decided to teach for various reasons or go back to teaching. Tsherin, one of the things that you have done, and we talked about it a little bit, is that you taught in Buddhist centers in California, but now you have returned to Nepal, and you have started this institute for teaching traditional thangka painting, as well, maybe, and I don't know, I'd love you to talk a little bit about it, contemporary thangka painting, if that is the way to talk about it. Could you just discuss a little bit about how now you teach? Tell us a little bit about this school and your approach to instruction or pedagogy with your students. Your students are both adults as well as young people.
Yeah. So I think it was in 2016 when I was in Nepal. I was there in 2015, late 2015, for a project because after the earthquake in Nepal, I had gone to visit my family, and then I was also preparing for my exhibition in Hong Kong. And but during that period, my father, because people were actually quite shocked from the earthquake experience, and I had a very lengthy conversation with my father, and he had this. He was worried, what happens if his generations were to pass away, then will this traditional art will be continued? There's only a handful of traditional masters in Nepal right now. So he asked me if I could do something about it. So, and also here, in early 2018, we decided, my wife and I decided to move back to Nepal for a few years to see if there's anything we can help with my father's dream, basically. So I went back and then came across this large number of young traditional artists who have a limited sort of what is happening right now is because of the commercialization of traditional art. Many of the artists who actually go to study these traditional art form is only partial. They only learn how to do the paint application or just a partial information, so that they can immediately go and start making money. And I was very disheartened to see that many of these thangka painters in Nepal were only how do you say, learning these fragments of the tradition. So I thought like maybe it would be nice if we could actually educate them, those who already have like some information, and then provide them with like the complete education if possible. So we don't necessarily have a school or anything like that. It's actually my studio space, which we transform into classes every like 2 or 3 days a week. And then I invite these young thangka painters to come and study, especially all the sketching and then the detailing and all these other elements which they are not aware of. I actually, how do you say, sometimes I feel like I am already like a little bit corrupted as a thangka painter, you know. So what we have done, what we have been doing is we have actually invited practicing traditional thangka artists to come and teach classes on traditional art. And we have also invited like an artist, a practicing contemporary artist, to come and give like workshops and lectures to these young students who are still like high school students, etc. And so there are two types of classes taking place simultaneously to see like if there's anything. And the other thing, what I find very interesting is also many of these practicing thangka painters do not have access to information on what is happening outside the traditional art scene, you know. So maybe giving some form of exposure to them also to to share what is out there beyond the traditional traditional art. So
Tsherin,
that's
I mean, that sounds fantastic, and it's wonderful to see everybody working so hard here in these photographs. But when we started our conversation, you talked about the way your father taught you, which was starting with the Buddha head, and then copying over and over and over and over. So you said something about 7 hours a day until for 3 months until you actually could graduate onto the next stage. Is this something that you are trying to show your students or inculcate in your students? Is this the way we're teaching, or are you teaching somehow differently?
Slightly differently, I would say, because most of the students who are learning right now are actually the people who are like working for monasteries or working to make a living, basically. So they know partial thangka painting and they're already making a living, and they cannot really devote like all of their time into studying also. So in fact, what we are doing is like we're providing them information, and then they would have their own leisure time whenever they are free, and they would do their practices, come back, and then show their development to the teacher, instructor. And then so the system is, how I was educated is slightly different, because I was in a very comfortable space where I didn't have to pay to I mean, even though these students don't have to pay for the classes, they will have to still make a living because they have to look after their family and stuff like that. So we are sort of trying to, how do you say, trying to provide them extracted information as much as we can in a short period of time is what we are trying. And this is more of a still at a very initial stage. It was just started last year, and then after the pandemic, the classes are we're not really operating any classes at the moment. Yeah.
That's too bad, but hopefully now with your introduction to Zoom, you could do it over Zoom.
Yeah.
Gongyi, let's go to the next slide and we can talk about your teaching. Again, like Tsherin, you came to the United States and you continued to make your own work, but you also taught students, both adults as well as children, and they are taught in your studio as well. And I know you have very strong feelings about how to teach. Can you talk a little bit about how you have taught your students? Have your past experiences influenced the way you teach now? Could you talk a little bit about your own perspective or attitude towards teaching?
Yeah, 我觉得这个艺术的老师哈，不同于教数学或者教英语的老师，因为艺术呢本身它的这个基础哈，或者说它的出发点呢，是一个非常个人的一个表达，它不是一个就是说大家可以一样的一件事情，就好像所以要不知道这个呢，我觉得没法做艺术的老师。所以现在就是说，很多艺术的老师呢，我觉得他教的时候脱离了这个艺术表达这个基础呢，实际上就限制了学生。这源于我自己最早的这个附中的经验和我第一个老师的经验。我第一个老师就是特别的很幸运，他是一个就是在跟日本的老师学的。那日本的老师呢是和这个法国印象派学的，所以我记得我第一次进他的教室，他就是把材料给我，然后就让我画。我画完了，画得好，他就说好。为什么好他也不说，不好他就不说啊。那可是进了附中以后呢，他就是他的那个教育呢是那个俄罗斯的那个体系，他就是给你一个所有的人一个共同的看事物的一个角度和方法。这个实际上呢，就是我认为从长远的来说，就害了很多成绩好的人。因为我当时成绩不好，所以没害到我。因为我第一个老师很好，所以那个第一个老师的东西使我抵抗这个东西。所以那我同样呢，我在教学生的时候，我同样遵循就是我当初认为好的方式，就是我只是尤其小朋友哈，我觉得最好了，我很喜欢跟他们交流，我在他们后边，我只是帮他们。比如他们要临这个画，都是他们自己选，有的临这个，有的临那个，你喜欢哪个你就来临哪个。临的时候我给他们当书童，帮他们，结果他们做的东西就是出乎 Yeah, okay.
So I personally think that art teacher should be differentiated from math teacher, as art should be a personal expression, and there's no universal standard for everyone. So I feel like nowadays there are a lot of teachers, they teach art without art expression. And I'm very lucky because my first teacher, he studied in Japan. And this Japanese teacher actually learned is from Impressionists in France. So my first teacher, when he looked at my work, he would just say good, but he wouldn't tell me why it's good. But then after I went to the high school, the affiliate high school that in Kafa, that teacher, I really disliked him because he will teach a common perspective and method for everyone. And that kind of theory and methodology is actually from Russia. So I feel like that teacher had really bad influence on a lot of good students, but I don't really care because I'm not a good student anyway, so it doesn't have a big influence on me.
Okay, and so Gongyi will go back to your.
Oh yeah, and yes, I forgot the second part. And then the second part is nowadays when I teach these kids in my studio, I really love teaching them because I don't really act as their teacher. I will just be their assistant, and I usually stand behind them. So when they decided which painting to copy, I would just start start giving them tools and then trying to see if what is good and what is bad. And I don't really, you know, I'm not educating them, but I'm observing them from behind.
Yeah. 就是在我的概念里哈，一个好的老师，他不是考虑显示自己高明，他而是呢要考虑就是对方学生他在表达的时候需要什么，需要你帮他做什么，啊，这是一个很大的区别呀。
I think a good teacher shouldn't just show off their techniques, but they should understand first what the student's trying to express or trying to say, and then from their perspective, you help them with their how to express that feeling.
就是学生应该最先
You're breaking up, friend.
不是学生应该最早要知道他有一个表达的权利，没有人可以告诉他该怎么表达。就好像我想哭。你不能告诉我，哎，你要哭高一点，哭低一点。我想哭，我就哭，这是我要表达的权利。然后在表达过程当中，可能你遇到材料啊、技术啊等等的问题，这个时候老师可以来帮你。
A student should know first that they have the right to express. That's the first and foremost thing for the student to know. And like, for example, if a student is feeling sad and he or she wants to express that his sadness or her sadness through crying, you shouldn't tell them to cry louder or to cry quieter. All you can do is just to help them to find the material or different tools to express that feeling.
Yeah.
Okay. We're you know, we're running into time, and we also want to have some time for the questions from the audience. So I have a couple of last slides. Can we go to the next slide? This is one of your pieces, Tsherin. This is called Metamorphosis. And then can you go to the next slide? This is another work that I had the wonderful opportunity to see, I think, at the Rubin Museum here in New York, called Wish Fulfilling Tree. One of the things that I did want to ask you, and this is sort of our last series of questions before we go to the Q&A, is I look at these works and I look at what you learned from your father, and I look at traditional thangka work, and I think about your students, and I think about your father, in fact, or your father's friends and traditional thangka painters. How do you talk about these works to your students? How do you introduce these kinds of works to your students? What do they feel about them?
So I think many of the thangka painters, the thangka painting students at the moment in Nepal are still in the same, have same form of limited information that I had when I was growing up in Nepal. And what I found out was I think many of the thangka painters like that I came across were still in that bubble of understanding art as either two-dimensional or three-dimensional, you know, like object. So I guess I am also like exploring, trying to be a little bit daring to explore something beyond like what I was taught. And this has been a very like exciting journey for me. And another thing I wanted to do was also, after I went back to Nepal, I came across many of the other traditional artists, like repose artists, wood carvers, even like, you know, carpet weavers and sculpture makers. So I'm actually, from 2016 onward, I actually started collaborating with these like other traditional artists to see what we can like come up with, you know. So this has been an ongoing experiment for the last like 4 years, I would say. And I think this will also give some exposure to the students who are coming to study with us, to understand that art is not just like something that they have perceived. There's something beyond it too. So we do like have conversations, and like I provide them with catalogs, informations, films, for them to understand a little bit beyond like what is the traditional norm of artwork, I guess. So
Gongyi, I'm going to look, can we look at the next one for your next slide? Here's a picture of you in your studio, and then here's a fairly recent work, 2018, that's in using what you call your Windsor Blues series. Do you talk to your students about this work? And if you did, what would you tell them? How would you explain these works? How would you introduce these works to your students?
就这个温莎兰这系列呢，是开始于这个2005年。我觉得这个艺术哈，这个我要讲大道理，就是我觉得艺术就是人，就是你的状态哈，在什么地方，或者你这个人在什么地方，它就是你会做什么样的东西。我在2005年的时候呢，我那个时候摔了一跤，然后就是我那个当时摔完之后我都没法走路了，所以那几年就在这个非常安静，人就非常安静。我就忘了哪一天，我记得那个地方在那个桌子上，我不知道为什么就拿那个刷子哈，刷那个英国那个水彩颜色蓝，我是特别喜欢蓝色的啊，就这样一条刷完了又一条。我这个为什么开始了我不知道，但最后我发现就是这个在刷的时候，它这种违反操作规程的这种，得到了一些特别美的这个线条。这线条不是我用手画的，是颜色和纸发生关系以后它出来的。那么我觉得这个做艺术创作的人，就跟做任何创作，特别应该会选择这种偶然性。这个机会出来你要抓住，我觉得我这块我就很能抓这个，我马上我把这个就夸刷了一张纸，那觉得很美很美哈，就是我觉得美呆了，就是自己觉得。然后正好呢，在这个2008年的时候，05年，等一下哈，那2002年，对，
等，给你夫人机会。
你哪有时间？我这太慢了。
没关系，慢慢来。
So for this Windsor Blue series, I actually started this series in 2015, and I do think the artworks are reflections of the people's mind and their location. At that time, I actually had an accident, so I couldn't really walk. And so I become very calm, and I just usually stayed in a location. And I remember that day when I saw this blue watercolor on the table. So I just took it and with a brush, and I started brushing one stroke after another on this paper. And I really was stunned by this color and also the interaction between the color and the paper. And I think it is a lot of things like happening by accident, and I feel like as an artist, you have to see and to seize this accidental opportunity. And so I saw this and I really liked it, and I just started repetitively doing these motion of moving the brush on the paper.
Yeah. 然后2002年的时候呢，我去法国好像做了一个展览。展览之后呢，我在这个我原来学这个石板画的那工作室看到一个古时候的乐谱，就是他们石板印刷的古时候的乐谱，我觉得美呆了。我虽然不知道那个每个符号它发什么音，我就把那个拍下来了。拍下来我不知道干什么用，那结果回来呢，我就一看这个，我就用那个中国的那个传统的白颜色，把那个法国那个古老的那个乐谱，就是这上面哈，我把它就画上了。它这时候又像风景，又像音乐，又像什么，反正我觉得就我很喜欢，就是这样发生了。那然后之后就这个合作呢，我一直后来还画了好多，就是说不一样的位置。那这是18年做的，实际上最早是这个 2005年开始的。
So okay, so for actually the whole story of how this happened is actually in 2002. I visit France and I saw in a small workshop like a lithography work of a music script, and I really loved this script. So I took a picture of it, and I don't know what to do with the picture. But later when I took it out and take a look at it, I started taking out a white color from the ink, and then started to draw this white ink on the blue paper. And so these white marks look like notes and also look like small landscape. And the picture you saw right now is from 2018, but I started this series from 2002.
Okay, well, we have many other questions and we could go much further on this, but we have questions from the audience. So I think it'd be great to take the opportunity to hear what other people have to say or have a question. Here's a question for Tsherin from the audience. Are there opportunities for Buddhist practitioners in the United States to undergo training in traditional methods? Understanding it's the foundation through which innovation can arise.
I think there are right now I'm not living here I'm just here temporarily in California, but I know there are several teachers who are providing these classes here in West Coast as well as in East Coast. So I'm sure I don't have the full information, but I know there are several teachers who are providing these classes here in the US. Yes.
And you worked in some Tibetan centers, correct me?
Yeah.
Okay. And perhaps if you think of some centers or something, we could maybe forward it to the gentleman or woman who asked that question.
Yeah, I think these are not in Buddhist centers, but private classes by instructors, thangka painters. So not necessarily in Buddhist center, but I think they are organizing traditional thangka classes here in the West Coast and in East Coast. Definitely, there too. Something like Rubin Museum might have some information also.
Yeah. The Rubin Museum is a fantastic museum in Manhattan, and I'm sure they have resources, but we can circle back on that. Another question coming in from the audience, one for Gong Yi. This is a question from somebody named Han Chin. This person, I don't know if it's the male or female, says, I was a student at CAA when you were giving lectures at the printmaking department, and now I teach in the US. Or so this person was a student at the China National Academy. And Ferren, if you'd like to translate. I was wondering, how do you recharge yourself from teaching? How can teaching enrich your practice? So I think what the question is what is the influence of teaching on your own practice? Does it inspire you? Does it change you? Ferren, maybe you can translate.
我不太。
他说这个刚才提问，他是在中国的一个CAA 是
China Art Academy, I think it is China National in Hangzhou.
可能是浙江美术学院，然后他说当时您是在那个学校的版画系做一个讲座，然后他当时听了您的讲座，他当时是那儿学生，然后他现在也来美国了。他主要的问题就是想问一下，您觉得就是教学对您的作品有什么样的影响？
我觉得教学就是。哎呀，这个问题我还真没有，因为教学，尤其小朋友哈，我觉得给我一种活力，就是我很喜欢和他们玩儿，我和他们真的是在一起玩儿，而且他们有的时候，有的小孩说，老师你根本就不懂我在干嘛，我说，哎呀，我说我是专业的，然后他说什么呀，就是，然后我还要把我的那个，出的画册给他看，我说你看我都出书了。就是我和他们很平等，我不觉得我是什么懂艺术的老师，所以这种交往让我感觉非常愉快， 而已，我没有得到了另外什么，我不知道，就是让我愉快，一种年轻的、青春的，我70多了，和小孩来往有多开心呢？是不是？
She's saying, I think it's pure enjoyment for me at teaching kids, and it just makes me feel energetic again, and also young. Because when I'm teaching, and I feel when I'm teaching them, I'm just playing with them. And sometimes the student would criticizing me and say, "Teacher, you don't know anything," and I will tell them that I'm a professional, and I will pull out all the catalogs that I had and show them. But for me, I feel like I'm not an artist to them, and I'm just play and enjoy the time with them.
回答了吗？
There's another question. 回答了，很好。There's another question that's come in. It relates to the tradition versus innovation, which is sort of the center topic of what we've been talking about today. Is it contradictory? Tsherin, I think this one is probably for you.
Okay.
Is it contradictory? Can you have both? And how do you feel about that?
Well, actually, the innovation that I think innovation is very important because for so-called development, progress. But at the same time, I also feel that this innovation most of the time comes from like the past. You know, for based on whatever past experiences we have, we basically build on top of it. So it's very important to appreciate and acknowledge the past or the tradition. And I think it depends on individual. Like I have like immense respect for both innovation and the tradition. For me, it was much more important to explore something that was beyond the traditional boundaries. So I felt that was the right thing for me. But again, I'm sure like many other artists might feel that traditional art is something that they would like to delve in and go deeper into it. So it's a very personal thing, but I have immense respect for both innovation and tradition.
Can I ask you a personal question?
Yeah, please.
In terms of your family members, either your uncles or your close family who are traditional thangka painters, how do they feel about your art, your more contemporary art?
Oh, actually, in the beginning, it was very difficult for them to understand it, but it took many years. Even my father, who was my teacher, and I started showing him my work since like 2011, I think, the images. And I think Wish Fulfilling Tree, the sculptural installation that you saw, that was in the slide earlier, was the first work actually he got to see in Nepal in 2017, because I was part of an exhibition over there in Kathmandu Triennale. And I had created this work to be interactive, where people would come and throw like coins over to the sculptural piece. And I think he saw it and he really enjoyed it. And it takes time for them to understand it, but once they do, but I think they appreciate it. Yeah.
Interesting. I know lots of conservative ink painters who are very, they're very protective of the traditions, and
Yes.
at times can be quite rigid about accepting innovation within their tradition. Here's another. Sorry, keep going.
Sorry. Yeah.
No.
Even within the tradition, like if we were to look at the tradition, it's not static. Like it's not what we see from like 14th century varies to what we see today. There's been a lot of changes, gradual transformation. So of course it's not a static thing. It appears as it is, but there's always like innovation occurring even on the tradition itself. So yeah.
Right. Gongyi, we have one question, relating to your students. Your students, you have adults, but who are, more my age. And then you also have young students, as well as Tsherin has young students. They live in the 21st century. They are surrounded by technology, their iPhones, their Instagram, their social media. And yet you both are teaching students using tools, using medium that go back thousands of years. What would you like your students to retain, keep, to learn from, and what would you like them to discard or ignore?
请他翻译。
Yeah.
刚才 Jane 他问的问题就是说，您现在教了很多学生，既有成人，也有一些小孩儿，然后他们每天都是在使用很多的科学技术和社交媒体，但你们教授他的是一个绘画，就是一个技巧和工具已经拥有上千年历史的一门学科。那在这个悠久历史的学问里，您希望您的学生应该保留哪一些传统，又应该摒弃哪一些方面呢？
我觉得这个问题哈，其实就是一个大家都在想的问题，可是呢，答案是非常不一样的。我认为这个传统哈，按我的想法哈，不是一个模式，它是一个，其实是一个，在传统当中，比方说我们说中国的山水画哈，我记得2003年拿了一幅这个巨然的这个秋山问道图拿到我的工作室了，是那个临摹的哈。我把它一挂在那之后，我再看我自己所有的画，我觉得都太不好了，我就想把它都撕掉。为什么呢？这里不是说我要学的像这个巨然一样的手段，或者说用他的毛笔，用他的绢像他那样画术，不是的。我觉得是我这个人的内在状态，我这个绘画呈现出来的那种不可见的东西太 low 了，就是我这个人不成功，这是一次经验。还有一次经验是我自己临这个王羲之的心经，我记得我临了1个月，那个时候时间很多嘛，临了1个月我临不好，我都气死了。为什么？因为我原来在中央美院附中的时候，我画这个速写可以画得非常惟妙惟肖的，就是画得很好。为什么这几个字我写了1个月，而这么专心写不好呢？后来我明白了，不是形的问题是我自己内心的我的身心状态，当时离王羲之太遥远了，因为我那时候很紧张，有压力而且人呢就是说不愉快。那王羲之呢，是他已经，你要看那个《世说新语》那本书里讲他已经是那种就是活得非常潇洒了，这种状态，你这状态不对，你把那个就是你按模子描下来也不对，所以艺术是一个人的问题。所以那个为什么我愿意跟人分享艺术呢？我觉得实际上真正能够就是 follow me 的人他会感觉到。你去跟这些古代的大师等等交往，你最后改变的是你这个人，你这个人会变得越来越好，越来越就是说，我们说的就是说，档次会往上走一点，就是不是那么世俗，不是那么物质性，而更多一些精神上的东西呀。这就是我跟这个成年的学生呢，我要交往的是这一块，所以呢，就是在跟他们这个交流的时候 ，OK。
I think this is going to be our last. We got to wrap up now. Sorry, Tsherin.
Okay, so when I think about tradition, I don't think it's a modular, because when you look at the landscape painting, I will just tell a very small story. In 2003, I got a copy work of an artist named Ju Ran, and it's like an Asian painting. So I took it back to my studio, and when I comparing this copy, like this painting in comparison to all my previous artworks, I just want to tear everything in my studio, because it's really too far from this painting. I don't think it's anything related to the tool or the paper. It's just the person. I feel like my state is very far from Juran as an artist. And then the second story is the artist called Wang Xizhi, and I'm trying just to copy his calligraphy work. And I spent a whole month, but I couldn't really make the calligraphy look even close to what that work looks like. And I'm just really mad at myself, because when I was in high school, I'm really good at copying work and doing sketches, and I don't understand why I couldn't copy his work at this calligraphy work. And then slowly I understand it's actually not about the form, but it's the condition of the people. At that moment, I'm just too nervous and too depressed at that stage of my life. And it's too far from Wang Xizhi as an artist, because when I read about him, and the book documented him as like he let go everything. So at that moment, when you look at the master's work, it's really not about like the painting techniques or the skill, but I feel it really elevated me as a person. It just made me a better person, and it's something spiritual. So when I'm trying to teach an adult student, I'm trying to teach them about these, like to let go all the materialistic side, but be more mature, spiritual, more pure.
Well, I think on that note, I think we can all agree that that's a great way to stop this evening. So I wanted to thank all of you, Tsherin, very, very much. We have many more questions for you. We'll send them to you so you can respond.
That's okay.
Gongyi, thank you very, very much. And Furen, you've done a fabulous job of translating. It's really heroic. Anybody who knows how difficult it is should realize that, number one, Furen was at one point in her life a professional translator, but it wasn't Chinese to English, it was Russian to English.
Wow.
So this is a woman of many, many talents. But anyway, thank you very much to the audience. Thank you very much to the AA team behind the scenes. And again, we were so pleased to have this opportunity. So goodbye and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Translate. Yeah.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Yeah,
Bye-bye.
bye.